members, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 1:39, and I have just one correction from the morning, which is incredible that we only need to have one correction, that the BOE is not a GovOps agency, and so I stand corrected on that one. And we're going to go on now to our informational hearing on the Legal Entity Ownership Program. And we'll go first to item 10, BOE's Legal Entity Ownership Program. That's going to be a presentation from the BOE executive staff regarding the operations of LEOP. But I've just made my second mistake, at least, of the day by not offering up my opening statement about this hearing. I want to first start by thanking my board colleagues for scheduling this important informational hearing on how the Board of Equalization and our 58 county assessors determine the reassessment of commercial, industrial, and corporate property when there is a 50% change of ownership or change of control as mandated by Prop 13. As administrators of California's $98 billion property tax system, it is our obligation to ensure that the system is fair, efficient, and comprehensive. The BOE's Legal Entity Ownership Program, commonly known as LEOP, is an integral part of our property tax administration programs. Working in partnership with the Franchise Tax Board and our county assessors, the BOE's LEOP department prepares notices of findings which let assessors know that a 50% change of ownership has occurred and reassessment is required. The LEOP process is essential to ensure our property tax system functions efficiently so that property valuations are recorded based on true changes in ownership. Correct taxes are paid and accurate revenues are received by our schools, counties, cities, and special districts. This duty is obviously more important today considering the significant revenue challenges that are faced at all levels of state and local governments. The purpose of today's informational hearing is to examine the LEOP process with the following in mind: to learn more about the current operations of LEOP from our BOE staff, to inquire about possible ways to improve the LEOP process, to hear from our county assessor partners, to learn about their experiences and receive their recommendations, to hear from experts and advocates about the ways to improve LEOP and possible policy initiatives to ensure that all constructive changes in ownership are captured for the purposes of reassessment. And lastly, to hear from interested parties and the public about their experiences with LEOP and to hear their views. As always, we'll have a robust exchange of views among BOE members and participants in this informational hearing. And I'd like to give an opportunity for my board colleagues if you have initial comments that you'd like to make, and if not, we'll, Mr. Emron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you for taking such a great lead on this. It's certainly a great way to start the year. I want to thank everyone, including the Board of Equalization staff, our county assessors, partners, and all the other folks that came in. LEOP, or LEOP, is not a technical exercise alone. It is a critical safeguard of the fairness in California's property tax system as ownership structures become more complex and increasingly opaque. The public depends on this board to ensure that changes in control and ownership are identified accurately, applied consistently, and enforced fairly. Today's presentations will highlight both the strengths of the program and the challenges it continues to face: persistent late filings, reliance on post-transaction discovery rather than voluntary compliance, and the growing administrative burden on the Board of Equalization and county assessors. As a board, our responsibility is not to only understand how LEOP operates today, but to ask whether it is positioned to function effectively tomorrow, particularly as commercial property transactions evolve and public confidence in tax equity remains paramount. With that context, I look forward to discussing how the program is performing, where modernization efforts are working, and what additional steps, administrative, educational, or legislative, may be necessary to strengthen compliance and transparency moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other comments at this point in time, we'll go into item 10, the BOE's Legal Entity Ownership Program, LEOP presentation from the BOE executive staff regarding the operations of LEOP. And we'll go first to our executive director, Ms. Yvette Stowers.
Good afternoon, Yvette Stowers, Executive Director for the State Board of Equalization. I'm very happy to present or have this presentation on LEOP, and we'll be basically tossing the mic over to the Chief of this department, Ms. Lauren Keach, who will provide you with some extremely useful information regarding our process, the following requirements and penalties, how we discover reassessable events, and our notice of finding reports that we submit to the county assessors, and our modernization and streamlining. I'm confident that our program is very efficient and effective, but I will leave it to Ms. Keach to explain. Ms. Keach?
Thank you, Ms. Keach.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Stowers. I'm going to start standing up, but I may transition to sitting down.
No problem.
If that's okay with everybody. All right, then. Well, let's get started. Good afternoon, honorable board members. My name is Lauren Keach, Chief of the County Assessed Properties Division, and I will be presenting an overview today of the Legal Entity Ownership Program. Next slide. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Okay, so in this presentation, I will be covering the following topics: the background on change in ownership in California and legal entities, an overview of LEOP and the process, filing requirements for Form BOE 100B and penalties, discovery methods for reassessable events of legal entities, notice of finding reports, which are monthly reports LEOP distributes to county assessors, and lastly, some of the modernization and streamlining efforts made over the years. Next slide, please. So just some background. On June 6, 1978, California voters passed Proposition 13, which rolled back real property to 1975 market values and limited the property tax rate to 1% plus the rate necessary to fund local voter-approved bond indebtedness, and limited future property tax increases to no more than 2% annually. So under Proposition 13, properties are reassessed to current market value only upon a change in ownership or completion of new construction. Further, AB 152 was passed in 1983 to amend and reorganize provisions of property tax law in the Revenue and Taxation Code affecting Section 64A pertaining to legal entities. So more specifically, Section 64C specifies the change in control of a legal entity. And Section 64D sets out when a cumulative transfer of original co-owners' interests in a legal entity triggers a change in ownership. And both of these circumstances would warrant a reassessment of the real property held by legal entities. Next slide, please. So as a result of the Assembly Bill 152, Sections 480.1 and 480.2 were added to the Revenue and Taxation Code, and the Legal Entity Ownership Program, referred to as LEOP, within the State Board of Equalization was established. These sections require legal entities to file a change in ownership statement with the board, and this broad language refers to filing of change in ownership statement with the board, but the statement is the Form BOE 100B, Statement of Change in Control and Ownership of Legal Entities, not to be confused with the change in ownership statement that is filed with assessors about a property transfers, which is in fact a different form. So LEOP was set up as a statewide clearinghouse to gather information regarding entities that have an interest in California real property that experience a change in control or a change in ownership. Next slide, please. So for the roles, LEOP is co-administered with the county assessors. LEOP is responsible for discovering changes in control and changes in ownership of legal entities statewide and disseminating that information to county assessors. LEOP does this by reviewing the Form BOE 100B, which is called the Statement of Change in Control and Ownership of Legal Entities, to determine if a change in control or change in ownership has occurred under Revenue and Taxation Code Section 64C and 64D for an entity holding California real property. LEOP is concerned with transfers of ownership in legal entities, not property transfers, and as part of its review, it analyzes the transaction to determine if it is subject to reassessment or is otherwise excluded from reassessment based on certain provisions of law, and also reports those entities that are a failure to file timely and are subject to penalty. LEOP provides county assessors with monthly reports on entities experiencing such changes, and then the county assessor is responsible for reassessing the entity's real property as of the date of change, or in the case where an exclusion applies, noting the excluded transfer in the real property records and applying that penalty if applicable. So that's the overview of those roles. I will go into that in more detail later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So for the purpose of this presentation, let's define what a legal entity is. Assessor's Handbook Section 401, change in ownership, defines a legal entity as any business organization that is legally permitted to enter into a contract, including a contract for the purchase, sale, or lease of real property. Legal entity interests may be owned individually, owned by another legal entity, or held in trust. And then an important note about the trust is that ownership is determined by the beneficiaries. Some of the most common legal entities holding title of real property in California include corporations, partnerships, limited liability companies, joint ventures, Massachusetts business trusts, and real estate investment trusts. Next slide, please. So again, the analysis is really separated into the transfer of interest, whether it's a transfer of interest in a legal entity or a transfer of interest in real property. LEOP is concerned with transfers of ownership interest in legal entities, not transfers of interest of real property. Next slide, please. So part of this law that governs the legal entities and knowing the rules and the statutes that govern it is that legal entities can transfer interest without triggering a reassessment of the real property unless the following two circumstances occur. That is a transfer of interest that results in a change in control, or a transfer of original co-owner interest that results in a change in ownership. So now I'll go into more detail on these two types of transfers and provide some examples. And then as I get through the examples, I can definitely take time to pause, take questions, and make sure everyone's understanding and following along. Next slide, please. So starting with change in control, this is the big one. It determines when an entity that owns real property experiences a change in control, and all real property held by that entity or entities under its control would experience a reassessable event if more than 50% of the voting stock is acquired by a person or an entity, or if they acquire more than 50% of the partnership LLC in capital or profits, or if they acquire more than 50% of the total ownership in any other entity. So under these circumstances, all the real property owned by that legal entity or entities under its control would experience a change in ownership, or change in control would be subject to reassessment. And this also applies to property that is either leased from a government entity or for long-term leases that are 35 plus years. Next slide, please. So here we have a demonstration leading up to what a change in control will be. You can see Corporation A owns 100% of Corporation X, which owns 100% of real property. So now if it doesn't necessarily matter how much is transferred, but if there is an acquisition of this Corporation X that owns the real property of more than 50%, then it would be a change in control. If it's less than 50%, it would not be a change in control. So on to the next slide then. You'll see that Corporation A is transferring 51% of its ownership in Corporation X to an LLC. So now this LLC has controlling interests in Corporation X, which owns 100% of real property. Therefore, under Section 64C, that property is subject to reassessment. And then since 64C occurred, they're now required to file that statement, change in control, under 480.1. Next slide, please. So these are to show some other examples, this being the first of types of transfers that would not result in a change in control. So this is a transfer that results, a transfer of Corporation X from A to Corporations B and C. But you'll see here, the outcome is B and C are only holding 50%. Neither one of them has acquired that controlling interest. So there is no reassessment of the real property, even though 100% has transferred. Next slide, please. Another example here, coming down to 25% transfers from Corporation B and C to now Corporations D, E, F, and G of that Corporation X that owns 100% of the real property. However, you'll see in this outcome, no legal entity or person has acquired controlling interests of Corporation X, and therefore there is no reassessment of the real property, thus no filing requirement. Next slide, please. Before we get into change in ownership, just want to take a pause if there are any questions, if we're good to move forward. Everyone good? Okay. You guys are pros. Okay, so change in ownership. This is a different type of scenario that involves two steps. So Section 64D specifies the meaning of change in ownership and the type of changes for legal entities that involves cumulative transfers of original co-owner interests where a property was previously excluded from reassessment under Revenue and Taxation Code Section 62A2 when it was transferred to the legal entity. So when the real property is excluded under 62A2, the persons holding the ownership interest in the real property immediately after become original co-owners. So that is step one. So when the original co-ownership is established, transfers of original co-owner interests are tracked. And once the cumulative transfer is greater than 50%, that would trigger a change in ownership under Section 64D. So I just want to note that 64D, when this occurs, it's only that property that is previously excluded under 62A2. So this entity could hold other properties, but if those were not part of the 62A2 transfer where that original co-ownership was established, they would not be affected. It's also important to note that a change in control can occur and take precedence over the change in ownership. So if they're doing these cumulative transfers and they break that 50%, but it also results in a person or legal entity acquiring controlling interests, then that would take precedence. It would be a change in control, and all real property held by that entity or entities under its control would be subject to reassessment. So next slide, please. So the key takeaway here on the 62A2 is that in order for the real property to qualify for the proportional interest exclusion from reassessment, that ultimate ownership in the real property must remain the same before and after the transfer. So even if they're the same owners, but the proportionality is not there, then it would not qualify. So those are the key qualification methods in order to qualify for the 62A2 and grant that original co-ownership. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here is an example of where establishing that original co-ownership here. You'll see A owns 60% of real property, B owns 40% of real property. Essentially, they're inserting Corporation X and maintaining that proportionality through Corporation X, which owns 100% of the real property. So now we have established A and B as our original co-owners. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we have year one. We're doing this in years, so to kind of develop a timeline here. Year one was when they established that original co-ownership. And then in year two, A is going to transfer 10% to B. So you'll see in the after graph here that B is holding 50%, A is holding 50%. So we're not looking at a change in control here. Only 10% of that cumulative 50% has been transferred. So there is no change in ownership under 64D. Next slide, please. Then in year three, A transfers 40% to C. So C is a new person here, but again, we're now only at 50%. It has to be cumulatively more than 50% to trigger a change in ownership under 64D. So we have the two original co-owners on here, now C is new, but again, 10, 50, 40% is held, and there's no change in control here that we're concerned with, and also no change in ownership. Next slide, please. However, into year 4, now A transfers 1%. That breaks the 50%, putting us at 51%. So due to a cumulative transfer of more than 50% of the original owner's interest, this property is now subject to reassessment under 64D. Okay. Next slide, please. So there are some exclusions for legal entities, and this slide lists out those exclusions that are available. The first one is what I've mentioned, the 62A2 transfer that can happen at the legal entity level, as well as the real property level, for that proportional transfer. There's an exclusion for spouses and registered domestic partners, and then the other type is the affiliated groups as a non-taxable reorganization, which has specific requirements to qualify. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing some statistics dating back over the years. I believe the last presentation was in 2019. So really, we're just highlighting the accomplishments in production as far as processing the BOE 100Bs. And I will discuss that later on in our modernization and streamlining efforts. But we've made great strides in the number of filings that we are processing each year. This also shows you in the second column of the data, the number of CIC stands for change in control, CIO change in ownership, the number of those processed within those filings each year. So you'll see over the past 6 years, over 10,583 reassessable events that have been discovered, followed by the number of parcels that have been reappraised with a total of 63,756. And then breaking out those that are excluded because, if they're a reportable event, they experience that change in control, change in ownership, we would process that information and then report that to the assessors, but note that they are excluded at that time of that transaction. So again, next slide. So some of the filing requirements for change in control and change in ownership. As I mentioned earlier, sections 480.1 and 480.2 were added as a result of AB 152. It requires that a change in ownership statement, what we refer to as the Statement of Change in Control and Ownership of Legal Entities, Form B100B, must be filed when a transfer of ownership interest in a legal entity under 64C or 64D occurs, and that California real property is held. So the statute also requires that these events be reported to the board within a certain period of time following the change in control or ownership event. Currently, it is 90 days. Before January 1st, 2012, the law required filing within 45 days. And before January 1st, 2010, there was no time period requirement for filing. Next slide, please. So sections 480.1 and 480.2 are discussing the requirement to file. And section 482B is the statute governing the penalty if the statement is not filed timely. So the penalty for failure to file timely is 10% of the taxes applicable to the new base year value of the real property reassessed if a change in control or change in ownership has occurred, or it would be 10% of the current year's taxes on the real property as of the date the due date period expired if a change in control or change in ownership has not occurred. So if we had sent a request for them to file and they did not within that time period. There is a process to abate the penalty by filing with the County Board of Supervisors within 60 days of being notified by the assessor. And also a BOE 100B statement must be filed with the BOE in order to receive an abatement. Next slide, please. So this slide demonstrates the CICs and CIOs reported for calendar year, the percentage of penalties applied in the following column compared to those that were filed timely. So for example, in 2025, we had 2,386 changes in control and change in ownership reported, and then 42 of those received a penalty. So there is quite a number of them that are, getting processed with penalties, but the majority is filing timely. So next slide, please. So as far as discovering changes in control and changes in ownership, there are three main ways in which we discover the transfers that result in these events under 64C or 64D. The first and the main one being through self-reporting by the legal entities as they are mandated to do so. However, the other two methods are through board requests to file, where we send out requests to file the Form BOE 100B, and we are made aware of these through two sources, the first being the Franchise Tax Board, and then county assessors. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, this 480.1, 480.2 outline the requirements to file, and they should be self-reporting the events. The intent of filings within 90 days is so that the BOE can advise affected county assessors of reassessable events more timely, so that they can properly reflect the market value of the entity's real property and enroll that new base year value. Before the January 1st, 2010, the majority of filings were a result of board requests to file. And the reason the BOE received so few reported filings is that there were no penalties for not self-reporting to the BOE at that time. The penalty only applied if the BOE requested the entity to file and it failed to do so timely. So with the passage of Senate Bill 816, effective January 1, 2010, entities were required to self-report within 45 days or be subject to penalty, which then became 90 days in January 2012. So although the entities are required by law to self-report changes, we know that doesn't always happen. So we have a mechanism for discovering these changes in control or ownership that are not self-reported to us. And we mail requests to file when we become aware that an entity has undergone a change or acquired another entity, as we are made aware through these sources. So I'll talk about that one main source that I briefly mentioned, which is the Franchise Tax Board. And this is due to our partnership with the Franchise Tax Board. This agency serves as a source of discovery for sources of legal entities that are not self-reported. This is in accordance with Revenue and Taxation Code Section 64E. The FTB assists the Board of Equalization in determining whether an entity has undergone a reappraisable event. And the FTB does this by including questions on the tax returns of corporations, partnerships, and limited liability companies. There are 5 income tax return forms, and the form numbers and questions are identified on this slide for your reference. I'd like to highlight that these questions were updated with FTB as there were returns filed for calendar year 2024 for better clarity and consistency with the BOE 100B form questions to increase the effectiveness of this discovery mechanism. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is going to present some of the statistics on the filings received from self-reported versus FTB filings. In any given year, you can see that the number and percentage of filings that are self-reported and those that are requested based on the information we receive from FTB as a result of what the entity reported on its income tax returns. The percentage of self-reported filings that result in a change in control or ownership is higher than those of the FTB board-requested filings. But there still are reassessable events being discovered through this mechanism, as you can see through those percentages. And overall, it increases effectiveness and the awareness for legal entities that are filing these income tax returns each year so that they're aware of this program and the filing requirement, and then they would answer those questions properly and file with us properly going forward. So to see a reduction in those percentages would be a good thing. Next slide, please. So then again, the other way that we discover changes in control or ownership of legal entities is through the county assessor's offices. The assessors assist us in discovery by referring potential changes to us using the form BOE 100BR. The assessor staff may be advised on a property statement or see an article on the information on the internet or receive information from taxpayers themselves. And this county referral form is available on the board's website for counties to notify us of potential changes in their county. Next slide, please. So once LEOP has completed the process of reviewing the filing, making the determination on the change in control or change in ownership, or if it's excluded, notating any applicable penalties, and providing supplemental analysis, that information is disseminated to county assessors on a monthly basis. I also include on here our non-response report. This is something that we would do annually for those entities that fail to respond to our request to file. So we notify counties of those as well, that they would be subject to penalty. Next slide, please. So this slide just includes more details as to the information that's included in those reports. They're very detailed each month. There's always a cover letter included in there. We include a copy of the B100B filings with our processing notes. We try to make it very clear so that when it goes to the county, they know exactly what happened, when it happened, so they can really just take it from there and do their part of the reassessment process. Within that, we have the reports that compiles all the lists of those that had the change in control or change in ownership that had been processed by the unit within that month. We split the report two ways, by company name, so by the legal entity name, or by county, so they can just go and pull their specific county report. And then we have a separate report with those same two in it for excluded changes. We also include a special report for any amendments or corrections made to prior filings that have been processed. And then we include a merger summary. A lot of times mergers can result in real property transfers, and not all county assessors are notified. They don't always file the appropriate paperwork. So if they file with us, we take the time to process that and make sure that that gets to them. And then again, the non-response filing list. This has all the information as to those entities that did not file, with a lot of information on how to handle it on their end with imposing penalties. Okay, next slide, please. So upon receiving all of that information from us, monthly and annually, the assessor's offices would review these reports. They would identify the real property in the county that's subject to reassessment, reassess that property, apply penalties if applicable, and then notify those entities and enroll those reassessments and penalties. Next slide, please. So lastly, I would like to conclude by highlighting the process improvements dating back 2019. This program has focused on modernization and streamlining efforts over the years, starting with the processing of the B100B form, transitioning to a paperless environment. We created a modernized online web database that streamline our paperless processing and tracking abilities. It also gives us a lot more data and ability to research and going historically. We also implemented online electronic filings of the BU100B. Taxpayers can go on our website, complete it fully electronically, instead of filling out the paper and mailing it to us as has been done in the past. And then we also, as I mentioned, revised the questions on the income tax returns that are filed with the Franchise Tax Board. So with that, I want to recognize the LEOP team and all their hard work that has helped this program excel in serving legal entities and the California taxpayers. And then this last slide will provide contact information for LEOP should taxpayers or anyone need to reach them directly. We have a great team that's available to help you. We respond to inquiries quickly, and we do the best that we can to go above and beyond to serve and answer those questions, whatever they may be. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this presentation and share the intricacies of LEOP and the program's success over the years. That will conclude my presentation, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a great presentation for us. Any questions? Members, Mr. Vasquez, did you have one?
Just a quick one. Thank you for this. I didn't know how this all works, and you really broke it down real good. And it sounds like, at least from the presentation, that there's several ways to get to the change of ownership through the process. Although most of it, I guess, is self-reporting, it looks like. At the end of the day, are you comfortable, or do you feel that it's adequate? Or because you don't have, obviously, probably the staff to do a lot of these spot checks. And at the end of the day, I guess if somebody, like I think it was one of the slides you showed where they create an LLC and it's 40-40, and somebody might own 10% or something, but at some point of that 10%, well, I guess if it clicks into the 51, it creates the change of ownership. Do they file that with you or the county, or who's notified of that?
So they would file that BOE 100B form with us if they did trigger that change in control under section 64C, or if it were to be a change in ownership under 64D. So that's that form, BOE 100B. We have the main page of the form that asks them those specific questions. Did you acquire another entity or controlling interest greater than 50%? Followed by a second question, did that entity hold California real property? And then it gives them directions, if they were to answer yes to both of those questions, to fill out an appropriate schedule and give us all the details of information that we would need on that specific transaction, on the real property that was held, so we could do our analysis and detailed review of that form and that transaction to determine, okay, this real property experienced this reassessable event, and all of that goes into our process and our database, and that's computed into the reports that go out to the assessors.
But that's all done by basically self-reporting. If they don't report it and still make the move where somebody becomes the owner of, a piece of property with over 50%, doesn't notify or doesn't file it, is that a possibility?
Well, if they don't file it, then they're looking at the 90-day penalty for not filing timely, but then that's also why we have our discovery mechanisms in place with the franchise tax board, because they would file an income statement with the franchise tax board that has those questions on there that are identical to our questions. On the first page, it's near the top, so, if they're answering under penalty of perjury, they should be reporting that to us. That list would come to us. That's a monthly process that we handle. With FTB, we reviewed the list of those entities. We would cross-check it with our database because they may answer yes on that and have already filed with us. But if they filed with us, then we wouldn't send them a request. However, if they have not, then they would go on the list and be actually sent a form for them to complete and send back to us. So it comes down to them knowing these laws as being a legal entity that has California real property. It really is their responsibility. Whether they don't know, they may have legal representation that can advise them when they make such transfers and these types of transactions occur, that they would be knowledgeable of the law that requires them to file.
Okay. Mr. Emron.
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you. That was 30-plus slides you got through very, very concisely. In regards to the penalty deterrence, we've seen on the charts there's consistently high late filing rates. Does staff believe the current 10% penalty structure meaningfully incentivizes compliance, or does the data suggest otherwise?
That's a good question. The penalties can also be higher because it's, sometimes there are multiple entities involved in a transaction, and that can kind of skew that percentage there. Hopefully they missed it this one time and then recognize that there is a penalty when it does in fact come to them, and then they understand why this penalty occurs and this timeline is in place. As far as, we have compliance by enforcing this penalty. So I can't speak to the legal entities as to why they don't file timely or if it's discovered later on. Some of these smaller entities that don't have legal representation aren't aware of it until they get a family attorney or someone to administer their legal entity holdings, and then they're informed about this filing requirement. So again, that's why the questions on the franchise tax board forms are good, to increase awareness as they file those tax returns and help us in discovering those that would already be late and then are penalized by that time.
But in a year where the franchise tax board, for example, at Controller's Chair, we had Los Angeles County get an extension, so you're not necessarily able to use that data. How do you mitigate in that situation where FTB is not giving you timely reports because they can't at the moment?
We would just process them, as the data becomes available to us, because typically by the time we get that data from FTB, they're already past the 90 days. So at whatever point that information becomes available to us, we would still do our due diligence by sending entities those requests to file. That has not happened to us, so I can't, speak to a situation that has occurred. But it would be my thought that we would just handle them when they come. It could be burdensome on our unit by having, if there was time periods skipped, and having a large list of those filings to send out for request. So we would have to navigate how to handle that workload.
Understood. That's good to know. And then my very last question, the data shows on average more than half of LEOP filings are submitted late. What does staff identify as the primary drivers of late filing?
Just probably lack of knowledge of the penalty requirement, complexity of these transactions that people don't realize until it's too late. If there's a change that's due to death, which is very common for, families that have these, someone may pass away and they're overwhelmed with all, obviously, what they're going through, and then having to deal with paperwork within 90 days is a pretty quick turnaround. So I think that's a main cause that we see. And so again, in those circumstances, they could take these to the County Board of Supervisors and plead their case in an attempt to abate the penalty.
Just a quick follow-up, Madam Chair. So when you talk about education and outreach being lacking of, are there targeted outreach efforts to taxpayers, attorneys, accountants, and professionals who frequently structure these deals? And how effective have those efforts been?
I would say our major outreach is through the annual FTB filings, by having that information in there, as well as our website. If they were to go and want to find information, we have a very detailed webpage dedicated to LEOP, filing requirements, penalty provisions. And our staff, if they contact us for questions or send us an email, we educate them through that way. When we made our electronic form available, we reached out to, we have frequent businesses and law offices that file with us, so we reached out to them to let them know that that feature and capability was now available. So those are sort of our smaller efforts of outreach that we do. But I mean, definitely more outreach, I agree, is always a good thing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question. So the penalties were established by the legislature to get compliance. And do we have any data on sort of a breakout of the value of the property, of who's getting the penalties? And what I'm trying to get at is, I wonder if it's people or small businesses or whatever of a lower income that tend not to have legal representation, that would tend to inadvertently go into a problem of being over 90 days. Because I think, like in the case of a death and property then being transacted, that's a fairly short timeline, but that comes from the legislature. Is that right?
Yeah, as far as the data that we have available, it would just be the quantity of those and the number of legal entities that actually have those penalties applied. Because then at that point, our role is to inform the county assessors, and then they actually apply those and then would go through the collector's office to collect that. So I wouldn't have detailed as to figures on that, and that's not something that we collect, but if there is a way to find that information out and see how we can address it better, we could maybe collaborate with county assessors.
Okay. And it looked like from the slide presentation that in the recent years, the Form 100B was right around 4,000 to 4,500 instances in a year. And that just seems to a layperson. I mean, I've tried to look up online how many corporations are there in California, and no one has a solid number, but that seems like a very low number. And so I'm wondering, if it is effective at capturing what the transactions that are truly going on.
Well, again, legal entities, they're kind of in their own realm of property tax, so they can, in the change in control examples I showed, they can do many transfers without triggering a reassessment. You know, if you're to do that at the real property level, you're gonna get a partial reassessment for those transfers unless there's some other type of exclusion. But, you know, there are advantages and disadvantages to holding property and legal entities, and knowing the law and the transfers that you can do to not trigger the reassessment, you know, is probably what they're trying to do here. And yeah, so I can't speak as to how many, you know, legal entities there are out there. I do agree that it does probably seem low in comparison, but I would just assume that it's because they're knowledgeable, and if they do hold real property, again, this legal entity with real property, not just legal entities in general, as many legal entities just own businesses and lease their property and don't own it. So as far as what we're capturing for those that own the real property and experience these specific events that would trigger the reassessment, that's what we capture and we report.
Great, and I think we'll probably hear from the county assessors what the flow that comes in from them is like, so we get a general idea of which streams are the most impacted or the most commonly used. I wonder if there's any type of an auditing process between the FTB and the BOE to ensure that 100B is capturing these instances of changes.
Well, they put together a list of every single entity that answers yes to those questions on there, and then that's when we would cross-check it with what we have reported or not reported. So really, they're just following the statute that requires them to assist us in discovery, and then we're doing our part with following through with that discovery by bringing it to the legal entities, saying, hey, you didn't report this to us, but you reported this on your income tax return, so you need to tell us what happened, and then we would examine that information.
Okay. And what would be sort of the magnitude of the county assessors coming forward to LEOP staff in terms of identifying changes of ownership? How big is that flow? I don't know exactly how to
It can
phrase
vary
that.
from year to year. You know, I don't want to put an exact number on it, but we are reporting so many of them to the counties. And, you know, when we do get them from the counties, we take the time and attention, and sometimes it's a filing that we have already received and would inform them on if it were pending processing or if it had in fact been processing. But it could get up to maybe 100 or more per year of those. And then the outcome of those would tend to vary as if it would actually warrant us sending a request to file, if it's already been addressed, and then we would let them know either way.
Okay, and I hope I'm not hogging the time, but I just have a couple more here. I've seen discussions in various fora about the role of AI to identify potential changes in ownership, and I wonder if that's something that the BOE has come across. Is that being used at all?
In our processes, we have not used AI. It's very technical. We have a skilled team that analyzes these transactions and all accompanying documents and information that may be included with this filing, which can get pretty lengthy. So I would not rely on AI, and you know, there are so many little nuances. One different step in a transaction, you know, or anything minor could create a different outcome, which is what also makes it so interesting and why we really train our staff and rely on their expertise to fully interpret and process these filings, and then be able to communicate that to the county assessors in a way that if the county assessors then needed to communicate that to the taxpayers, those legal entities that are receiving that form or reassessment.
Okay, great. Well, I think I'm good with that. Mr. Schaefer?
I'm concerned about the penalty assessments. That's strictly the role of the assessor. Does the assessor have ability to partially abate, make a judgment valuation as to the seriousness or the amount of good faith involved? And once the assessor makes its decision, either in whole or in part, is there a review available as to the penalty? I guess the review is when it comes here.
So the abatement process, so we inform the county assessors of the penalty. The assessors would enroll the reassessment and the penalty, and then it would go, from my understanding, to the tax collector, who would then send out that tax collection form and collect the penalty. But then they're notified they have 60 days if they want to abate it, and that is a full process that's handled with the County Board of Supervisors. So I'm not actually too involved or familiar with the details of that process. I have never heard of a partial abatement. They either abate the penalty or they don't in their decision, but it would be a formal process with due diligence from both sides as to if the penalty were to stand or if they were to abate it for some reason.
Yeah, there are some good reasons. People have a death in the family, they have
Right.
to travel, you know. Thank you.
Yes.
Everyone's good with that? I'm sure we're going to have kind of an ongoing process as we digest what we've been told on this. So thank you so much for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we appreciate the LEOP unit's work on this as well.
Thank
So
you. Yep, kudos to the team. Thank you.
Thank you. And a question for staff. We are at the time now where we anticipate taking the afternoon break. Should we launch into our next panel or take the 10-minute break now?
I know we have a public comment that we need to take first.
Okay.
And, but for item number 10, we're
Yes.
here.
So we'll take the public comments for item 10, and we have at least one person who is here in the auditorium with us, who is Scott Kaufman, Legislative Director for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Please come up.
First of all, my thanks to staff for the presentation. Appreciate it. It's very good. As said, I'm Scott Kaufman, the Legislative Director for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Glad you're having this conversation. I think it's an important conversation. We have, on several occasions, presented language to the legislature that would close what we call the Dell loophole. It has continuously been opposed. We support efforts to do that, but if the true effort is split roll, which I think it is for some of the folks here today, we would vigorously oppose that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And we have one written communication. So if this would be the right time to have you read that into the record, we would appreciate that very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can do.
We have to check with the AT&T operator.
Well, we'll do that, but we're putting them a little bit third in the parade. Please.
Alrighty, we received this public comment late last night. To the Honorable Sally J. Lieber, Chair, the Honorable Ted Gaines, Vice Chair, Honorable Antonio Vasquez, Member, the Honorable Mike Schaefer, Member, the Honorable Malia M. Cohn, State Controller. January 28th, 2026. Agenda Item 10, informational hearing on the Legal Entity Ownership Program, LEOP. Chair Lieber and members of the board. California is home to the most I'm going to get this go. Yes. companies in extraordinary wealth, yet the working families who keep the state running and are being priced out of their own communities. California operates as a two-tier system. Everyday people pay their fair share, while the largest corporations skirt by. We have allowed bad policy to protect corporate fortunes at the expense of public investment. The most egregious example of this two-tiered system is the corporate property tax loophole. This board is meeting today to discuss the Legal Entity Ownership Program, LEOP. And it is here that one of our state's most glaring structural inequities is maintained. For decades, some of the world's richest companies have exploited state tax loopholes to avoid paying their fair share on massive property holdings. While a family buying a home triggers an immediate property tax reassessment, corporate entities use complex shell games to transfer ownership interests without ever crossing an arbitrary 50% change in control threshold that triggers a fair market valuation. The impacts of this distortion are clear. 2020 research from the USC Equity Research Institute shows that moving to a market value system for commercial and industrial property would yield between 10.3 and 12.6 billion in additional revenue every single year. 6 years later, these numbers are now likely much higher. This isn't about small businesses. Just 6% of commercial properties, those worth over 5 million, account for a staggering 78% of that revenue. That missing revenue is money that should be funding our schools, our healthcare system, and the public infrastructure that made corporate success possible in the first place. This is compounded by an increasingly hostile federal government intent on stripping billions of dollars from our healthcare system and illegally withholding billions in FEMA payments. We cannot continue to ask individuals to carry the burden for the corporations that hire high-priced lawyers to game the system. And we cannot build a 21st century state without a tax code that continues to perpetuate loopholes for corporations that were created nearly 5 decades ago. I applaud your recent steps towards reform, but I think we can go further. Meaningful change can be achieved within the current framework simply through the redefinition of administrative rules. If the board cannot or will not exercise its authority to protect California taxpayers from corporate lawyers creating and exploiting loopholes to avoid paying their taxes, then I will. Just like I have taken corporate tax dodgers to the ballot before, I will not do it again. Recommendations for things you can do right now. Commission on Official Statewide Valuation Report. You can't manage what you can't measure. The board could commission a comprehensive report to quantify the following: the total value of properties that have changed ownership without reassessment, and calculating the gap for those properties, the revenue foregone by existing LEOP loopholes. In addition, the study should size the total revenue foregone by the commercial property tax loophole and explicitly analyze the valuation gap by comparing current book values on the assessor rolls against true market valuations based on modern asset valuation standards. The study need not make policy recommendations, but we need an official accounting of the difference between what these properties are worth and what they are actually paying to demonstrate how unfair the system has become. Californians deserve to know county by county how much they are being shortchanged. conduct a split-roll feasibility study to determine the additional resources and funding needed for both the BOE and counties to quickly and effectively administer a split-roll style reform. Strengthen control definitions. Use your rulemaking authority to broaden how change in control is identified, ensuring that affiliated entities or groups acting in concert cannot bypass reassessment through split ownership schemes. Adopt more aggressive interpretations of indirect ownership, ensuring that complex, multi-tiered LLC structures are treated as a single change in control when the ultimate beneficial ownership shifts. Increase discovery and accountability. Direct the LEOP unit to enhance data cross-referencing with the Franchise Tax Board to identify hidden transfers, moving away from a system that over-relies on voluntary corporate self-reporting. Modernize reporting thresholds, reevaluate administrative rules to ensure that when a significant majority of an entity's economic interest changes hands, even though cumulative transfers, the property is reassessed to its true market value. The core truth is unavoidable. A tiny number of corporations have accumulated extraordinary wealth and use their lawyers and lobbyists to avoid paying property tax. Meanwhile, hardworking California taxpayers, our cities, counties, schools, and hospitals pay the price. This must change. Sincerely, Tom Steyer. That concludes the public comment we received in writing.
Thank you. We'll go out to our AT&T moderator now. Moderator, if you could please tell us if there's anyone waiting on the telephone line to make a comment on item 10.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to speak, please press 1-0. And no one has queued up. You may continue.
Okay, thank you. So members, that concludes item 10, and we'll take our 10-minute afternoon break now before we go on to item 11. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got a 30-second warning. We're going to pull stuff back together now because we still have several more items. We're learning a lot here. And we're going to go on in just a moment to item 11, which is the California Assessor's Perspective, commentary and presentation from the California Assessors Association and several assessors. And I'd like to start first with the Honorable Kristen DePaul, who is President of the California Assessors Association, and she is the Modoc County Assessor Recorder. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, honorable board members and members of the public. Thank you for the invitation to speak this afternoon and offer perspective from the assessor's offices. My name is Kristen DePaul, and I am the assessor recorder for Modoc County, and I'm currently serving as the president of the California Assessors Association. The CAA represents elected and appointed county assessors who are constitutionally charged with fairly, uniformly, and lawfully administering California's property tax system. The association promotes professionalism, consistency, and public trust through collaboration, education, and compliance with state law and BOE guidelines. Today's presentation is offered in that spirit. BOE members and the public will hear perspectives from 4 counties on how state law is implemented at the local level. These perspectives reflect our shared responsibility and the operational realities of LEOP administration. First, we would like to recognize and thank board staff for their participation in this program. They carry the burden of the determination of whether a change in ownership or change of control exists in each instance, which at times can be complex. Once the board has made their determination, they release their monthly findings to the portal, and key personnel from our offices log onto the portal to retrieve monthly reports. Once we review the reports, we download any 100 Bs relevant to our county with eligible transfers and send them to our transfer analysts, and they begin the initial steps in the reappraisal process by sending out a change in ownership form and flagging the properties for reappraisal. We also review the no response list for a change in ownerships that have potentially been picked up at the county level and are not responding to the state. As mentioned in the presentation, sometimes the discovery is an exchange of information that comes from our local assessor's offices to the BOE through the 571 business filing process or other means of a discovery. We do appreciate the modernization and improvements made by the BOE staff to the program. It has helped everyone, I believe. One issue with the program that seems to plague all of our counties is the time delay in receiving the legitimate change in ownerships and change of controls. The delay can cause additional workload in terms of years of roll corrections process, sometimes causing counties to lose 1 or more assessment years at the new base year value due to exceeding the statute of limitations for roll corrections. Delays also cause taxpayer agitation and staff time to manage cases and complaints when a taxpayer receives multiple years of escapes several years after the transfer or a change of control has taken place. We do recognize the statistics noted in the staff presentation regarding the drastic increase over the last few years, with LEOPs more than doubling from the 2021 to 2023 years. And we also want to note that there has been marked improvement in the timeliness of the reporting over the last year or more, and the delays have significantly decreased in many cases. Responsibility for assessment and collection of penalties for late filers rests on the local county assessors, but the BOE is very proactive in providing notification and support to the assessors, even sending a template letter to local offices to edit and send out if needed. The association would like to take this opportunity to thank the board staff for their responsiveness to our requests and to our questions. Recently, I had a question about 100B for our county that was missing from their report, and I had the missing document within the hour. LEOP has also begun to play a large role in the county recorder documentary transfer tax program. My colleague John Tudor, who I believe is online, will speak to the LEOP program's contribution to the recorder program shortly, as he is the chair of the documentary transfer tax committee. In conclusion, the LEOP program is an important piece of the change in ownership equation, and our association is grateful for the administration and partnership the Board of Equalization provides, and we look forward to working together to make the program as effective and productive as possible at both the state and local levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if the board is okay with this, maybe we'll hold all the questions until the end, and then we'll kind of let folks come in as they'd like to. So thank you so much for
absolutely. Thank you.
kicking that off. And we will go now to the Honorable John Tudor, Napa County Assessor Recorder Clerk. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. As you can see, I'm at home today, and I trust you can hear me. I'm getting an echo at mine.
We can hear you very clearly.
Thank you. I wanted to thank the board and their staff, as I have for the past 40 years, with the wonderful cooperation between the board staff and our offices. As Kristen DePaul mentioned, the BOE lag time is improving. LEOP assures reassessment of corporate changes of ownership to keep equity with all property owners, which was mentioned in one of your public comments. Our office specifically, as a mid-sized county, has a wonderful relationship with the LEOP team at the BOE. Now, the no response list is a large undertaking, but we take it seriously. And we do occasionally find that changes of ownership have occurred that were not reported. There was a question earlier from member Schaefer about the penalties. And I wanted to point out that penalties are referred to either the Assessment Appeals Board or the Board of Supervisors if they are acting as a local board of equalization to hear an abatement process that Ms. Keach mentioned. As she also mentioned, the county keeps the penalties. But it is a workload for the assessor because we must defend the penalty at the Assessment Appeals Board. Finally, Kristen DePaul mentioned the documentary transfer tax, which is on the recorder side. Again, in terms of equity, as was mentioned by the public comment, every property owner who buys a house has to pay documentary transfer tax, just as they have to be reassessed. And the North Ardmore case by the California Supreme Court defined realty sold as changes in control and changes of ownership of legal entities. And therefore, beginning after the North Ardmore case, approximately a decade ago, assessors and recorders are cooperating across the state to make sure that LEOP changes that the assessor receives are treated the same as other property owners who are subject to documentary transfer tax through the normal recording process. Documentary transfer tax on unrecorded changes of ownership has increased DDT revenue substantially. I will be standing by if there are any questions.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for showing us what I'm guessing is your cattle behind you there. It's very good. Thank
That's
you.
one of our 65 head running around.
Thank you so much for that. And now I think we have a representative from LA County who's here with us.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank the board members, fellow assessors, and members of the public. And I want to thank the California Assessors Association for inviting Los Angeles County to this hearing. I'll be providing some input, maybe a recommendation or two related to the administration of LEOP. And although I'm representing LA County, I think I could fairly say that the other assessors up and down the state are bothered by two things. One is escape assessments, and the other is assessment appeals. And the tendency of the LEOP process results in both, most likely. What I mean is, in a scenario where reporting of the transfer or reporting of the change in control is, let's say, 60 days past the 90-day reporting requirement, we're probably going to enroll that change in control or change in ownership in a normal fashion, but it's almost guaranteed that we will pick up an assessment appeal. Why? Because the taxpayer feels, well, I was only late by 40 days. This is ridiculous. Why should I have to pay a penalty? So they're going to be motivated to file an assessment appeal. And again, we're going to have to show up and prepare a defense of the penalty. Now, bear in mind that these assessment appeals aren't the normal type of assessment appeals. These are not appeals based on the value of the property or on whether or not a change in ownership occurred. It's going to be based on whether or not the taxpayer deserves the grace of the appeals board for abatement. The taxpayers don't really know what to do about this. And a lot of times the assessment appeal boards don't really know what to do with this. So it's really not ideal. Let's go to another scenario where reporting is, let's say, 3 years, 4 years after the actual change in control. Well, now there's going to be escape assessments issued. And there's also going to be, again, the penalty. The escape assessments are no fun. It almost always leads to taxpayer indignation, taxpayer frustration. They deal with it, but they're usually going to file an assessment appeal on the penalty. So we're going to pick up a penalty there. But it also happens that by the time we get around to identifying a change in control that occurred maybe 3 or 4 years back, the subject property has already sold. So we can't then, in good conscience, levy that penalty against the new owner. So we actually, due to moderately late reporting, we missed the opportunity to levy the late filing penalty, which is that 10% of the taxes owed. And we also encounter in LA County more extreme examples of late filings where the reporting of the change in control, change in ownership occurs maybe 9 or 10 years after the actual change. That leads to an unlimited number of escape assessments being issued. But it also bars the assessor from issuing the supplemental assessment because the supplemental assessment comes with a 8-year statute of limitations. So in the case of an extremely late reporting, the assessor misses the opportunity to file to enroll the supplemental assessment. It's then sort of forced to enroll many years of escape assessments. And we're going to pick up 2 assessment appeals in this case. We're going to pick up an assessment appeal on the escapes because a lot of the public thinks that they're only subject to a 4-year statute of limitation or at maximum an 8-year statute of limitation. So they don't know that when legal entities are involved, the statute of limitations is unlimited. So we're going to have to pick up an appeal there, and then we're going to pick up another appeal on the penalty. And so the suggestion that LA County has to avoid, as much as possible, to avoid late reporting, late filing on the part of legal entities is to add a single sentence to the BOE 502D form This form is titled Change in Ownership, Death of Real Property Owner. It's a change in ownership statement. On the top of the back page, the second page, there is a section which asks the recipient of the form to list any changes in control or changes in ownership pertaining to a legal entity. And they'll sometimes report something there. We would like another sentence added which says you must concurrently file a BOE 100B with the State Board of Equalization. Because what happens is our taxpayers think, oh, I've just filed this change in ownership statement. I'm completely off the hook. I fulfilled all of my reporting requirements. They don't know that there's another form. And I think the addition of that sentence would be helpful in perhaps reducing the number of late filings. Again, I think it's a matter of adding one sentence. I have three other suggestions as part of my presentation. One is that it appears determinations on the part of LEOP, change in control, change in ownership determinations, sometimes get stuck. What I mean by that is we see evidence of a BOE 100B form being returned sometimes 18 months before the LEOP can issue a determination or declaration, which they date enter it. So just yesterday, I was looking at an example where a form was returned, completed, or presumably completed to the BOE in March of 2024, the LEOP program. But it really wasn't date entered or completed until November of 2025, and then it made it onto the subsequent monthly report. If there's any way that the BOE LEOP program can help get some of these determinations unstuck so that they occur without that tremendous delay, I think that would be a vast improvement. Lastly, I have two comments regarding the monthly notice of findings report. One is if the notice of finding can contain assessor identification numbers. We see on the actual BOE 100B form that's returned that we sometimes see assessor ID numbers, but those ID numbers never make it onto the monthly report. So that requires then the assessor to do some good amount of digging to see, okay, given this legal entity, which parcels are involved? If that information is already provided on the report on the BOE form, why not include it into the monthly notice of findings reports? And lastly, we have situations where there's a parent company and let's call it a subsidiary, and the subsidiary owns real property in Los Angeles County, for example, that has undergone a change in ownership. And the name of the subsidiary company makes it onto the notice of findings, the monthly report. But the BOE, in its naming convention, it doesn't put the name of the subsidiary in the file name of the 100B form. It puts the name of the parent company. So where these two names are similar, it's okay. Usually we can do a search and locate the form. But if these two names are completely distinct and there's no overlap, it makes it hard for us to figure out which of these 100B forms applies to the subsidiary. So I would ask that the board also consider whether its naming conventions could be more explicit and more helpful to local assessors. Lastly, I would ask the BOE LEOP to consider advocating for legislation that extends the 90-day filing period to something that matches the 150-day filing period that is currently part of Revenue and Taxation Code 480, I think 480B. And that's where the death of the real property owner is involved, and it allows the trustee of the trust, for example, to file within 150 days of the death of the owner. I get a lot of follow-up phone calls from taxpayers who have received a LEOP penalty, and in most cases, it's due to the death of a patriarch, a matriarch. These are not always very sophisticated members of legal entities. Some of them you would think are familiar with the rules, but it's not always the case. I had one that called me who had worked as a real property appraiser for Santa Barbara County for 15 years. And he wasn't even, he didn't know about this reporting requirement to the Board of Equalization. So those are the main points I wanted to bring up. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you for being here, and I really appreciate these suggestions. So I hope you'll stay on the line so that we can potentially ask you questions if questions come up.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And now we have joining us here in the chambers, Honorable Joaquin Torres, San Francisco Assessor Recorder. Thank you for being here today.
Great, thank you so much, Madam Chair. And just want to echo a lot of the statements from my colleagues up and down the state. But San Francisco has somewhat of a unique situation in regards to some of the recent comments from Los Angeles. We don't have the same issues that, say, Los Angeles has mentioned with the AAB board in relationship to LEOP and appeals, although Santa Clara made mention to us that they would benefit from additional foundational education being provided to their AAB members, specifically in relationship to LEOP appeals. San Francisco is very happy to work with the BOE to provide the information around our work with the AAB. In the past 9 years, I've been told that about 99% of the appeals, 99 to 100% of the appeals that come forward are in the favor of the assessor. In our counties, it doesn't mean that that does not apply equally or equitably across the state and other counties. Just some additional comments from Santa Clara that per the comments you've heard, the work with the LEOP program has been much appreciated, with the work being diligent in terms of the structure as it exists. And they're looking forward to being able to find more functional efficiency in their relationship around LEOPs, with LEOPs, with the implementation of their new assessment tax system. But again, they would like some support and make a recommendation around additional education for their board of their assessment appeals board members. As a reminder, San Francisco, so Joaquin Torres, Assessor Recorder in San Francisco, we have a compact 7x7 footprint that combines high property values with high complex ownership structures. Individual properties are frequently held through multiple layers of LLCs, trusts, partnerships, and out-of-state entities. That accurate legal entity tracking is essential to understand true ownership, and especially in the post-pandemic environment marked by commercial transitions, office conversions, and entity restructuring rather than direct sales, programs like LEOP are vital to ensuring fair and equitable property assessments. Just as a matter of context, in San Francisco, roughly 10% of parcels are owned by legal entities, and that's out of about a little over 211,000 properties in San Francisco. In last year of 2025, around 7 LEOPs with multiple properties within each of those were processed last year. And many of our comments echo almost directly what you've heard from other counties. The quality of the work is strong in our partnership. The staff are very collaborative and responsive. And like our sister counties, we often receive some findings years after the underlying event. And that delay has real consequences. So it's not about the quality of the work, it's just simply about the rate at which information is being provided to us at timing. Monthly notice of findings of those reports are detailed and reliable. The staff, as I mentioned, are responsive and collaborative when we ask questions and raise concerns. And amended reports are timely when there are analysis changes that we see. The primary concern that we face is that we face hard statutory deadlines, as you've heard, in which we have to act. We have a very small, just one-person team who's managing the growing volume of complex filings, underscoring the importance of timely and accurate reporting. Those delays usually stem, in our opinion, from, of course, late taxpayer filings and the first in and first out processing model currently implemented by LEOP. For property tax purposes, we generally have 4 years from the date of transfer to act based on the event date as opposed to when LEOP notifies us. So it's actually the event date in terms of when that clock begins ticking, just to put a pin in that. As a result, when LEOP notices arrive after or close to the 4-year statute of limitations, we may have no legal ability to issue valid supplemental assessments or tax bills, as you heard Modoc County and our president from CAA mentioned in her presentation. For transfer tax purposes, the 3-year period runs from the date of notification, as I mentioned, not the transfer date. And although delays generally do not affect our ability to pursue transfer taxes, they can increase the risk that once that property is sold, it can limit our ability to collect on an unsecured debt. Just an observation there. There's a belief that these penalties don't really discourage any late filing. Given their structure, the penalty is 10% of the taxes on the new base year value, separate and apart from how real property is handled, with additional monthly penalties at 1.5%. In San Francisco for those who are continually late filers. So just noticing the disparity there between how LEOPs are handled versus real property. I think that speaks for itself. Some recommendations that we have, again, I think we've talked about this already, but just improving the processing prioritization. Can we adjust that first in, first out? So that we can prioritize cases that are near that 4-year statute of limitation to give us more time to process once we're notified. And then taking a look at the intent behind the penalties to discourage late filings. Does that framework appropriately encourage timely reporting? And does it adequately protect local tax revenues? We want fairness, we want consistency, we want timely compliance, not increased complexity, and again, very sensitive to the realities of people who find themselves in situations, as you mentioned, regarding thinking they had done something in good faith, or simply forgot about the timeline in which they needed to respond. Unfortunately, I've been in situations where I've had to talk to the treasurer and tax collector where there has been no remedy for someone who's had a late filing, even very small property owners who just simply had something skip their mind, and there's no recourse for them. So I've seen that take place as well, and it's just something that I think needs some attention around the intention that we have around the structure of these penalties. We have a very strong working relationship with LEOP and the board, obviously, and any observation or recommendation that we have is intended to close the gaps in the current system to ensure that people are paying their fair share, promote consistent statewide enforcement, and protect our ability to collect taxes that are legally due. So we would love to continue partnering on this to ensure that people are paying their fair share and building on what already works. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I see that we have a number of folks on the Teams call, and have we gotten any messages that someone would still like to present who's part of the Teams call? Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, LA County, for being here so strongly. I had several questions that I had intended to ask, and they all got answered through all the testimony that was offered up. So we really appreciate that. Members, do you have specific questions? Mr. Emron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great presentations. Always great to see our county assessors both in person and online. I did have a question about the uniform standards. Anybody can answer. Do counties apply uniform standards for evaluating LEOP referrals, or is it pretty scattered?
Shall we have Mr. Paul start us out, and then Mr. Torres, if you'd like to chime in also, we would welcome that.
So I think if you're talking more procedurally, so when we receive The LEOP through the portal, we review them, we print off our 100Bs, we bring them to our transfer analyst, and it basically, in Modoc County, it's done just as a normal commercial appraisal at that point. Our transfer analysts send out a change of ownership of their own to try to ascertain purchase price and anything that they can get in addition to the 100B filings. And we flag all of the properties that are involved for reappraisal.
Understood. From an operational standpoint, how resource intensive are penalty assessments and abatement requests for county assessors, and are there ways to streamline this process?
I'm gonna let LA and San Francisco take that because we have very few. I've applied 2 or 3 penalties in the last year, and actually none of them have appealed. So I don't think I'm a good case example, so I'm gonna let
Appreciate
LA
it.
or San Francisco take that one.
So we'll take San Francisco first.
Sure, I'll give LA just a little bit of time to come in. Just per my earlier comments, I mean, the manner in which we're going through the processes, we find are working pretty efficiently for us in San Francisco. Again, that doesn't mean that there are discrepancies in other counties. But certainly for us, as I mentioned before, the work, especially with the AAB and the education that we've been promoting with those members, of course, respecting their independence, has led again to favorable findings for the assessor in our process in relationship to those fees and penalties.
Appreciate it. While I have you here, Mr. Torres, Assessor Torres, I wanted to talk about, are taxpayers clearly informed that LEOP data triggered the inquiry, and are they giving meaningful opportunity to appeal before a penalty is assessed?
I think that the onus, and I think this is complements what Los Angeles County was saying earlier, at any time, in any place, in any program, on any website, in any piece of information, any public hearing, the constant reminder of what the law requires is something that needs to be repeated again and again and again and again and again, whether it is a LEOP participant or whether it is a real property owner or otherwise, to ensure that people are aware of their obligations to pay, to notify and pay on time. Otherwise, those penalties and fees will be applied. As was noted earlier by the BOE, something that I have to constantly say in public, whether I'm talking to seniors, small business owners, or otherwise, is that I want to make sure that they are educated about the law. So I think that everyone can do a better part of consolidating information, as was being mentioned by Los Angeles with that one sentence in question. I'm sure that there's consolidated communications that can exist across the board on where the multitude of filings and documents that need to be submitted to respective bodies can be better consolidated and communicated to the taxpayer. Certainly that's something that we've talked about in relationship to Proposition 19 and the series of paper and the multitude of items that need to be submitted that can be very confusing. Per LA, you think you file one piece of paper and you think you're done, or you think you took care of something via legal advice, which may not have been strong, or legal advice that was provided without consultation or communication with our offices. I think that it's on all of us to continue to communicate to the public. Always reach out to us and ask the questions on what my obligations are, because ultimately, per the law, and we are ministers of the law, as it is written and as it exists, that if they do not follow it, or if they're not aware of it, there will be penalties and fines, irrespective of a, quote, good faith argument that can be manipulated at times. There's certainly examples when people just simply don't know, and we're very, very sensitive to that, which is why education, communication is so important.
I agree. And you can imagine that many can't afford legal representation. Costs quite a bit for a real estate attorney. So when you're speaking to members of the general public, to seniors, to families, like how do you best effectively communicate and get this message across? I know if we participate in some of your workshops before, but where's the gap still existing?
I think the
between
gap
government and the
exists
public?
in just, the gaps can exist in multiple places for multiple reasons, depending on the constituencies that we're discussing and what those historical relationships of those constituencies are with government at every layer, at every level. Again, I think that what's most important is that we are as present as often as we can be as a matter of direct service and providing education opportunities to members of the public so they know what resources that are either free or available at low cost legal or otherwise, that they can take advantage of. It's why we've developed in San Francisco a partnership to provide free estate planning programs to ensure that communities that have typically been wary of engaging around property questions with government know that there is a trusted legal a body that can support them, and also making it much more accessible, making ourselves much more accessible as an office by virtue of popping up in neighborhoods, popping up at libraries, popping up in coffee houses, or senior centers or community centers, to let them know that there is a face to the name of this government office that can be punitive at times if they're not following the law, and making sure that we are there and available to answer any and all questions, not providing guidance or advice, making the appropriate referrals to nonprofit bodies that can provide free or at low cost legal services and legal guidance as they can do, so that all those questions and that education can be garnered, also in language as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Assessor Torres.
While you're up there, before you sit,
Hold on.
real quick,
Mr. Vasquez.
thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Assessor Torres, for your comments, and especially because you're one of the larger cities, and I know LA will probably come on in a minute here, but, and thinking of San Francisco, you know, you're the home to probably some of the largest companies that have been in ownership for many years.
Don't tell Santa Clara, because they were giving me shade
They're
at
out.
the recent swearing in.
But as a result of that, a lot of them have probably gone through a lot of renovations and improvements, which means they are subject to reassessment. Is that, and I'm assuming that's a task in itself, trying to keep up with all that.
It certainly is in San Francisco, especially at this time when we're experiencing the third consecutive year of extraordinarily high volume number of appeals across the board, both commercial and residential, that require our attention, with an ongoing stable, if not increasing workload, and a rising number of constituent queries that come to our office that normally would have touched those appraisers, but we've had to restructure in order to deal with those questions. But that is having an impact, focusing on those number of appeals that have increased 7-8 times than pre-pandemic numbers, with a limited increase in positions to address those appeals. That has had an impact and will, for the next few years, have an impact on the rate at which we're addressing changes in ownership and or new construction as assessable events. But we're paying very close attention to those statutory deadlines, which are shorter for the appeals, which is why we prioritize those, versus the longer timelines that we have, although still a deadline that we must reach statutorily to ensure that we don't lose any value in terms of new construction or changes in ownership. But that is a main focus and challenge and balancing act for us in San Francisco right now due to this unprecedented number of appeals that we've seen.
Well, you're basically answering my questions. That's one of the reasons I'm bringing it up, is that, you know, for you to take on another task right now, it sounds like you're really hitting it real close. And at the end of the day, I'm sure this could result in many properties not being reassessed in a timely manner and could just fall through the cracks at the end of the day.
I mean, that's the flag that we raise with our executive and legislative bodies, so that everyone is aware of the pressures that the office is under and the manner in which we're balancing the realities of the workplace with increased resources that we can use during this time, making them aware of the value of executive choice and restructuring, how those resources are being used to ensure fair and equitable taxation and valuation. But that's been our main focus in San Francisco, and we're balancing that and approaching it like a marathon that it is.
And given that situation and your experience, the LEOP program that we just heard about, how effective has it been in terms of assisting or providing
Oh, I mean,
guidance?
as I was mentioning, I think that the structure and the relationship is quite strong. The recommendations that we have are not about performance, but just rather about some potential operational changes or methodology changes. I totally understand the value of first in, first out approach, given just the volume of what the BOE has to manage with the resources that it has, but also just how do we balance that out with the realities of statutory deadlines that our jurisdictions across the state are facing that could benefit from some additional review of, in how items that may be reaching those statutory deadlines could be amended or adjusted in process so that we as assessor offices have more time to address those items, and so that we don't lose the opportunity to issue supplementals that would result in fair and equitable valuation and thereby fair and equitable taxes and resources that cities desperately need during this time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll just check in if LA County or Napa County have further comments to add on.
Madam Chair, if
Yes.
I may, there were two questions I'd like to respond to.
Please.
So one question from the state controller member was about how people know about the 60-day abatement deadline. And we notify them by certified mail of the penalty and do a second notice also by certified mail, just to make sure they know about the 60-day abatement. The other point I wanted to mention is that Los Angeles County talked about the defense of a penalty abatement is completely different than the defense of a value. And a different team in our office, our Title N team, handles penalty defenses, or at least the preparation of them. And those defenses depend on things like dates, proof of delivery, and the standard of willful intent, which is what the Assessment Appeals Board or the local Board of Equalization has to rule on. So I think that it is a workload, but it's an important workload because, as has been mentioned by all of the assessors, fairness and equity is what counts here. And we want to make sure that property owners, no matter of their size or wealth, are treated the same. And there are penalties for failure to return a change of ownership by regular people. There's penalties for failing to return a death of real property owner statement. And we want to make sure that all of those penalties are fairly applied and appropriately defended. I do want to echo what Assessor Torres said from the comment from Santa Clara County, that the AAB members and local Board of Equalization members should receive careful training on the abatement of penalty process, whether it's LEOP or change of ownership or death of a real property owner. And I haven't looked at the self-study program recently, although I've taken it, even though I'm not an AAB member. And I would suggest that the staff of the training team at the BOE, who are wonderful, might take a look if they wanted, if it's not there already, add a quick section on abatement of penalty, regardless of the nature of the penalty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, I saw LA County pop in and jump out there, but any last words from LA County?
Yes, briefly, the administration of the late penalty isn't as smooth as one would hope. I have to calculate the penalty, which is something I have to do as a one-off calculation. It's not system calculated. Hopefully I reference a mailing address that hopefully is correct. Sometimes the legal entity has its own mailing address separate from the mailing address that we have on file for normal assessment-related matters. That's an issue. So I send out a letter to them informing them of the penalty and of the right to appeal and the method of appeal. They then invariably give me a call back. I discuss this matter with them. They usually provide good cause over the phone, but I have to tell them, look, I can't be the prosecutor and the judge. You have to go to the appeals board to have this abated. the soonest the appeal hearing will be scheduled is 6 months out. So they're waiting and waiting on this appeal hearing. Assuming they have all their ducks in a row, they will go to the hearing. And if they succeed in having the penalty abated, then comes the refund issue. Like, these refunds don't go down the normal process of value reductions. It becomes a one-off refund, and because it's a one-off refund, it undergoes tremendous scrutiny from 2 different departments with tons of paperwork. And at the end of the day, I get a call from someone saying, hey, we can't send the refund to a P.O. box. I have to get back on the phone to the taxpayer and say, hey, look, do you have an actual physical address, not a P.O. box? We then have to send it certified. They have to be there in order to sign for it. It's really not ideal. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. And this is the layer that we were hoping to dig down to. So thank you so much. As we can take public comment on this item now, and we have no speaker cards from the auditorium, and we haven't received any letters on this one. So we'll go to our AT&T moderator. Moderator, do you have anyone who would like to comment on item 11 who's on the phone line?
If you would like to comment on item 11, please press 10. No one has queued up at this time.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our assessors who participated and have pushed information to others who are going to be here. And it's my hope that we'll be able to accurately capture the input, and then we'd love to run that by you before bringing it back to the board so that we have a record of the valuable time that you've spent here. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you. And we're going to go on now to item 12, which is the academic perspective, analysis and review of data concerning changes in property ownership that have been performed by academic institutions. And joining us is Kirk Stark, who is the Barral Family Professor of Tax Law and Policy at UCLA. Thank you so much for traveling to Sacramento to be with us.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. So I guess, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody, Chair Lieber and other members of the board, and especially the board staff and the prior speakers. And I actually just want to take a moment and single out, in particular, the assessor community. Whenever I come to Sacramento, I always learn so much. And I think especially from this crew of devoted professionals, I feel like I've really gleaned some important insights. I've been teaching a seminar for many years on Prop 13, and I'm making a list of guest speakers that I'll be able to invite to future iterations of that class. I wanted to focus my remarks, and there's going to be actually quite a bit of overlap, I think, with some of the prior comments, but maybe if I could add a little bit of sort of color and particularity to sort of draw attention to the long-term structural effects of these rules on the distribution of tax burdens in California. And I wanted to start out with just a few basic principles. The next slide, please. So it makes a lot of sense, I think. I think we all agree that it makes a lot of sense to tether property taxes to a change in ownership, to a market transaction. This is what Prop 13 did. People didn't like the idea of property taxes increasing simply by virtue of an increase in the value of property. We've had that exact same problem in the federal income tax. That's why we have the realization doctrine for the federal income tax, where we don't tax property as it increases in value. We only tax it upon a sale or disposition of the property. So that's a perfectly reasonable impulse for people who are interested in the operation of a tax system to have. When you do this, I think it's essential for the legal system to make sure that we define the market transaction, whether it's a realization event in the context of the federal income tax or the change in ownership for Prop 13, to do so by reference to substance rather than to form. So in the federal income tax, for example, there are very detailed rules that treat certain transactions as a constructive sale, even though an actual sale has not taken place. And that's an effort to subscribe to this principle of elevating substance over form. Unfortunately, I think in a lot of ways, the current statutory rules in California relating to the definition of what constitutes a change in ownership have the opposite effect of elevating form over substance. I wanted to basically just use two simple examples to illustrate the effects of these rules. And I'm really talking specifically here about Revenue and Taxation Code Section 64, for those in the audience who have their tax codes with them and want to follow along. Section 64A, 64C, 64D, these specific provisions that we heard about in some detail earlier. So the first instance of this that I wanted to highlight is one that's probably very familiar to everybody here in the room. Next slide, please. Which is the acquisition of the Miramar Hotel on Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica, which gave rise to litigation and an eventual decision from the Second Appellant District regarding the appropriate way to view this transaction. So initially, in 2006, you can see from the slide there that the transaction, this was Michael Dell acquiring the hotel, was structured as a sale of real property. Is that a change in ownership under the Prop 13 rules? Yes, of course it is, right? Somebody quickly realized, probably a tax lawyer or tax accountant, that this would have the effect of resulting in a reassessment, bringing all of the property up to its then fair market value. And so they restructured the transaction so as to avoid a change in ownership. So the next slide, please. So as you can see here, the new structure features, I think what Mr. Emron previously referred to as sort of complex and opaque ownership structure. So it is true that ownership structures over the past 40 years have grown in complexity and opacity. But I think what we're seeing here is that these rules, in particular Section 64A, are actually creating complexity and opacity. This would not have been done but for the way the statute is crafted. All right, next slide, please. So you can specifically see there that there was no one person who directly or indirectly had acquired control of Ocean Avenue LLC. Nobody has greater than 50%. And in consequence of that structure, it was not a change in ownership under Section 64C. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight something that people don't often talk about when we talk about this Ocean Avenue situation. This is the Miramar Hotel in 1950. Next slide, please. And this is what the Miramar Hotel is planned to look like 4 years from now. So what we can see from this is that there are very substantial changes underway in terms of the structure, right? And that will have the effect of bringing that property, the improvements on top of the land, into the roll at its fair market value. So the true beneficiary or the true benefit or effect of the rules that we're talking about is actually the underlying land, right? And eventually, over time, structures are improved, they're rebuilt due to either physical deterioration or use obsolescence and such. And so there are reasons to create new structures, market reasons, and that's all for the good, right? It looks quite beautiful, especially with the sun setting. So I wanted to sort of highlight in particular not only how these rules are having the effect that we're seeing here, but also that the effect is differential as to structures versus land. So the next slide, please. Yeah, that's good. Previous slide. There, thank you so much. So this is the Walt Disney Studios. Next one after that, please. Walt Disney Studios in Burbank, not too far from our house. I have very fond memories of this place. My wife worked at Disney for years. Our younger daughter went to daycare inside that rectangle there for a period of time. And what you're seeing here is a comparison of the 1983 assessed valuation to the 2023 assessed valuation for this same 43 acres there. And in 1983, the improvements made up 70.8% of the total assessed valuation of this property, and the land was 29.2%. If you fast forward 40 years, so this is 3 years ago now, you can see that the land now constitutes only 2.3% of the total assessment of the Disney studios, and the improvements constitute the 97.7%. So the point here is, again, the same thing that we observed with regard to the Ocean Avenue Miramar Hotel. Gradually over time, really what these rules are doing, you might almost think of it as it's a disappearing land tax. Right? The property tax is really two different taxes. It's a tax on land and it's a tax on structures. Well, by virtue of these rules, the land tax is gradually disappearing, at least with regard to property that is owned by legal entities. Next slide, please. So we can look in comparison to the Burbank studios. This used to be a part of Warner Brothers. Now it's a multi-tenant area with several sound stages and mixed use. So it's not exactly perfectly apples to apples, but it's pretty close, and it's only 2 blocks away. And the thing about the Burbank studios is it was actually recently sold, actually even subsequent to the data that I have up there. But as you can see, the Burbank studios, because it's been recently sold, the land is assessed at $8.5 million per acre. The land of the Disney studios is assessed at $260,000 per acre. So that's a very, very dramatic difference. I personally felt like I had to look up my own home. And we don't live in a particularly fancy neighborhood. We're in the San Fernando Valley. And our land is currently assessed, and this is based on a 20-year-old, we bought our home 20 years ago, 2005, at $4.8 million. All right, so I think it's, part of that is there's a morale issue around that. When homeowners begin to see that their own land is being assessed at $2, $3, $4 million per acre. Obviously, we don't own a full acre, right? So we have a tiny fraction of an acre. Whereas the Disney Studios is paying $260,000 per acre. It's the kind of thing that sort of calls for a system-wide reevaluation. Next slide, please. I have a colleague, next slide, who's a relatively young public finance economist David Alboui, he used to be at Michigan, now he's at University of Illinois, who has looked fairly recently at metropolitan land values. Next slide, please. And as you can see here in Los Angeles, in this statistical metropolitan area in Los Angeles, Long Beach puts the average land value per acre at 2.6 million. Obviously, it depends on where you are in that geography, right? So $260,000 per acre this is what's happening here is this is a function of section 64A, which, I'll read again. The transfer of ownership interests shall not be deemed to constitute a transfer of the real property of the legal entity. That's section 64A. That was introduced in 1979, and it may have made sense at the time. I don't think that either the Disney situation or the Michael Dell Miramar Hotel situation, I don't think it's at all a loophole. This is not a loophole. This is a conscious policy choice. It's as much of a loophole as, say, opening a 401k account is a loophole. There's a reason why Michael Dell prevailed in that litigation, because what he did was perfectly consistent with the state statute. Right? There was nothing bad or nefarious about it at all. This is what we have chosen to do. We have chosen to look the other way when there's an actual change in ownership, but there's not a change in control under section 64C. Next slide, please. I have a couple slides here that I'll finish with, and then some data from Los Angeles. I just wanted to highlight the fact that among economists, this is William Vickery. He's, I think, what most people would consider to be kind of more on the left, more of a progressive orientation in his opinions and his work. Recall that I said that the property tax is really two taxes. It's a tax on structures and a tax on land. From an economic perspective, the tax on structures is bad. Why? Because it discourages productive economic behavior of building and improving structures. The tax on land is good because land is in fixed supply. If we can tax land more and structures less, it should be a win-win, right? Instead, what Prop 13 is doing through Section 64A is delivering the exact opposite effect. We're taxing structures more and land less. So we have it exactly backwards. Next slide, please. Even from the more conservative end of the spectrum, Milton Friedman, the property tax is one of the least bad taxes because it's levied on something that cannot be produced, that part that is levied on the land. Right? So even if we all have an understandable antagonism toward taxation in general, right? The least bad tax is a tax on land. It's the type of tax that interferes the least with productive economic behavior. So how have these changes had effect on the ground over time? Next slide, please. This is from the extraordinarily helpful website of the Los Angeles County Tax Assessor. Next slide, please. We can see here what composition, the composition of the total assessed valuation of real property in Los Angeles as between residential on the one hand, that is combining single family and residential rental versus commercial industrial. And the data here are shown from 1975 to 2018. Next slide, please. So I just highlighted this in brighter, bigger red to make sure everybody could see it. But in 1975, the commercial industrial component of the Los Angeles County tax base was 46.6%. Fast forward to 2018, next slide, please. And it's 28.9%. Now that was 7, 8 years ago. So on the plane up this morning, I looked up the more recent data on the website. Next slide, please. And you can see that in 2025, commercial and industrial property as a share of the total tax base represents merely 10.4% of the entire property tax base of a county that's larger than most states. Right? So it is now overwhelmingly a residential property tax. And to, so it really speaks to, I don't mean to suggest that these changes are due entirely to the effects of these legal rules, but these legal rules are an important contributor to this long-term structural effect. It's tricky because there are lots of different ways you could address this. There are constitutional reforms, there are statutory reforms, there are administrative reforms, and then there are enforcement reforms, right? And probably some of this needs to be done at different levels, and I applaud everyone who's been attempting to manage the operationalizing the Section 64 rules on the ground with the LEOP program. That's really a heroic effort, but probably some attention needs to be given to this at a higher level, either through changes to the statute or possibly even amendments to the Constitution. Thank you so much for inviting me and hearing me out.
Well, thank you so much. We are so thankful that you were able to travel here from the LA area. And members, do you have any questions for the professor? Professor Stark? Mr. Vasquez.
As I listened to your thank you for the presentation. I wasn't aware of the shift, and the shift just happens, I guess, because of the value we're talking about it. And I'm just thinking about the fires that just took place in the Palisades. And, these poor folks that lost, in some cases, their business and their home because they own the two properties. They happen to own the two properties. And they're still going to get a tax bill. But the tax bill is because, from what I understand, 60% of your tax bill is based on the land, not the structure, which goes to what you were just saying here.
Yeah. I suspect that it varies by parcel and by area, but that's probably somewhere approximately true. And I concur wholeheartedly about the fire. Both my mother and my in-laws lost their homes in the Eaton fire. And so we've been dealing with that for the past year.
Wow.
Thank you.
Other questions? No other questions. Do you have any thoughts about what we've heard about technical operation of the LEOP program? It sounds like most of your focus would be on statutory or even more difficult constitutional changes. My one thought, which may not be all that helpful, is really a thought about resources. It does seem like the task that has been imposed on county assessors is something that's very significantly at variance with what county assessors normally do. Their focus is on real property within their borders, but the ownership of legal entities is an entirely different beast. There's no reason to think that that's in any way localized, because obviously you have to focus not just on direct ownership, title holder, but also indirect ownership. So there may be out-of-state, multi-state, multinational, foreign owners of entities that the transfer of which would implicate the operation of these provisions. So I don't think in 1979, it perhaps wasn't
a big enough issue to focus on at this level that there would be a need to have a staff of tax administrative officials who could not just assess the value of property, but also police transfers of stock, partnership interest, LLC membership interest, et cetera. There's a sort of square peg, round hole problem there about imposing that on the county assessor's office. And I suspect if there were a larger statewide investment in this, it could ease some of that burden. But I say that as an outsider to this. So take that for what it's worth.
Okay. Mr. Emron has a question.
Thank you. I did have a follow-up. A great presentation. I really liked your slides to kind of help paint the picture. So what portions of the inefficiencies do you identify attributable to LEOP versus constitutional constraints? And you mentioned that a little bit in your presentation. And big picture, what's your fixed proposal here? If you were in our seat, if you were a member of the legislature or even a county assessor?
Well, at the level of constitutional reform, you have far more degrees of freedom to craft a system that is consistent with divergent preferences and how to structure a property tax. If you intervene at the statutory level, for example, by making amendments to Section 64, then there's still going to be some administrative burden associated with that because you can't just, say, go to a split roll, for example, via statutory change, right? That would not be allowed. However, you could use certain mechanisms, such as rebuttable presumptions about transfers of ownership that would at least shift or share some of the burden to property owners rather than having county assessors have to go out and track it down. We do that already, obviously, with reporting requirements, but that's I was struck in particular by the story about the individual who was a real estate appraiser in Santa Barbara for so long and didn't even know about that. That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, this is as arcane as it gets, the LEOP program, except for folks in this room, of course. It's not an intuitive system, and I think that reflects the statutory structure. The statutory structure was designed to craft some kind of compromise nearly 50 years ago in a different political moment.
So what is the fix, sir? If you could make one proposal.
I hesitate to do that because I, would more often than not kind of trip over myself with these proposals. But I have great sympathy for the heterogeneity in county types in California. Los Angeles County is very different from, say, Modoc County. Right? This would require constitutional reform, but you could imagine maybe even a local option split roll, where a county could decide if it wants to go in the direction of adopting a split. There would be complications to that. It would create disparities among counties, but there's no reason that you would have to impose it on every county. It's possible to have a constitutional amendment that would give counties the opportunity, but not the obligation to take this on. It may also be the case that there are administrative hurdles in some counties that are less burdensome in other counties, perhaps.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, for being here today. We got one more question for you. Uh-oh. Go ahead, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Answer. In your research, especially, I'm assuming you've looked at other states. How are other states handling in this Prop 13 issue?
Well, the one other state that the sort of highest profile instance of having a change in ownership type provision is Florida. And Florida applies it only for owner-occupied housing. So they don't have any of these issues. Yeah. And so, you know, Florida's lovely. I have many friends who live in Florida. I don't often think of it as a guide for stellar interventions in tax policy, but to my way of thinking, they probably have the edge on that. That's not to say that we should, boom, overnight switch over. I think there was a kind of understandable reluctance back in 2020 to move to the split roll, especially in 2020 since it was right in the middle of the pandemic. So, you know, people can be forgiven for not jumping into that at that particular moment. You know, maybe some transition towards something like that, perhaps with a local option feature, perhaps with, you know, some attention to the peculiarities of the transition that we would face that obviously Florida didn't have to face since they didn't go down the path of treating commercial and industrial property this way.
Okay, well, we will cut it off there and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much, Professor. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge. And we're going to take public comment on item 12. We don't have anyone in the auditorium that I'm seeing making a rush up here. And no written communications. We'll go to the AT&T moderator. Moderator, is there anyone who's hoping to make a comment on item 12?
Please press 1, then 0 for item 12. No one has queued up at this time.
Thank you so much. And we'll go on now to our last item, which is item 13, major stakeholders perspective. And we have with us Lenny Goldberg, who is policy director of the California Tax Reform Association. And I just wanted to indicate, although Mr. Goldberg is a legend in Sacramento, he's also a real person. But the California Tax Reform Association includes SEIU, CTA, CFT, CNA, AFSCME, UDW, CPF, PEG, the State Building Trades, and the California Budget and Policy Center. So thank you so much for traveling from another state to be here with us today.
I can't say I'm speaking for all of those folks.
You might want to turn on your mic.
What? I can't say I'm speaking for all of those folks. They have a lot of different views, but the organization has worked on progressive tax policy, and I've done that for many years. There are many things to pick up on. I want to start with LEOPS, though. I was very impressed with their presentation, and I say that because for many years I had a researcher who went around and found what seemed to be real changes in ownership that were not being picked up by LEOPS. So in the past, we had a number of criticisms of how the LEOPS program, which is very, as Kirk Stark said, not many people know about it. We were quite critical of the way it may have missed or not understood changes of ownership, had a number of meetings. I think they obviously have moved well beyond that. But the problem, and I'm really going to talk about statutory and not administrative, and not constitutional, as many of you may know. I was deeply involved in the split roll effort Also, last year, you may remember, and this jibes with what Kirk Stark just said, I made a presentation about land only, about how important it is to really address the land issue. In the estimates done by the University of Southern California program, the failure to assess land represents about 50 in commercial industrial only, 50 or 60% in the counties, some counties 70% of the underassessment of commercial and residential property. So that's a constitutional question. Where LEOP started, and I want to say, is really not part of, and this is the law, this is not their issue. Change in control is never been and mentioned in Proposition 13. Proposition 13 speaks to change in ownership, not control. Now, the LEOP slides and Professor Stark's slides show how changes of ownership can occur with no reassessment occurring. And that has to do with change of control, which is purely a legislative construct that does not follow Prop 13. Prop 13 says a change in ownership. Now, we could define a change in ownership in a number of ways, such as the sale of a share of stock or a piece of an LLC. But in any case, it's not, change of control has no basis in the concept of change in ownership. In the question of original co-owners and the complexity of when a reorganization occurs, the law actually does what I'm going to argue is the right thing, which is it says, and a cumulative change of 50% of ownership shares generates a reassessment. Now, that's done after a corporate reorganization. And one question I actually have for, not probably to discuss today, but for assessors and for LEOPs, is how often, when there has been a reorganization, has that cumulative 50% standard should be applied. But I would argue that, and I would ask, probably not going to happen, but the Board of Equalization to recommend a change in law that is consistent with Proposition 13, that when there is a cumulative change of ownership of 50% of shares, of stock, of positions in an LLC, so that when the 5 of us here buy a property, there's a change of ownership. Or if 3 of us buy 60% of a property, there is a change of ownership, a cumulative 50% change. Now, where that's really important is with regard to, and this is the norm, I want to say, we can say people can manipulate the law, as that Dell slide showed, they manipulated the law. But in the normal course of doing business, of real estate transactions, shares change ownership regularly, not necessarily to avoid the law, but 3 of us will sell out and other people will buy into partnerships that are LLC. So it's part of the normal course of doing business is not reflected in the law that requires 50 plus 1%. So I want to give you 2 slides, if the first one could come up. Now, and let me say that the basic flaw in the law, where it fails to capture changes in ownership, are for publicly traded corporations. And that is to say, when I've tried to find out how often does change of ownership occur for a publicly traded corporation, how quickly does 50% turnover? I asked 3 different AIs, and they all said under a year. several months or under a year, 50% of a publicly traded corporation changes ownership, except for those that might be more closely held, or things like real estate investment trusts, which are more closely held, and they turn over over a year or a couple of years, not over a matter of months. Now, if we look at this chart done by USC Data Equity Research Institute, you see in commercial industrial, now this is about 10 years old, so this is going to change some, but there are massive numbers of properties that are at 1975 values. This was done in 2015, 2016. Which makes it just 40 years old instead of 50 years old. So 40 years old, and who are these properties? If somebody has died in those 40 years, it's been reassessed. We have inheritance for homes, but not for commercial industrial property. Likely because many industrial properties have, and Professor Stark pointed this out, have multiple base years, that the likelihood of that large line of 1975 values is on land. That the land has not changed ownership, but when we have larger properties, multiple base years, you'll have new construction, and that will have occurred much more earlier, or much later, anywhere along the line. So also the likelihood, we can't show this directly, but for smaller, it may be that smaller properties have changed ownership, but very likely that these properties are held by publicly traded corporations. So when I looked at Chevron, for example, virtually all their property is at 1975 value. The law, that is the law. They don't change ownership, even though their stock has probably changed ownership of 50 times since they were last reassessed. But Prop 13 says a change in ownership, not a change of more. Nobody has the ability to buy more than 50% of Chevron. So let's see, second slide. And this was mentioned by the letter from Tom Steyer, that 84% of if you looked at reassessment of commercial industrial, 84% of the value comes from 6.6% of the properties greater than $5 million. Now, which are those properties? Arguably, publicly traded corporations that own large amounts of this property, or real estate investment trusts that then hold land under that in LLC. And I want to reemphasize that it's not really the assessor's traditional role to dig into financial arrangements. It's their traditional role to look at property and reassess it. So the missing piece here really is for publicly traded corporations, but also the cumulative changes of ownership that have occurred since 1975, since 1985, since the year 2000. The solution is pretty simple. Senator Quentin Kopp, an independent from San Francisco, did a bill in 1991 that would have said cumulative change of ownership is considered, and for publicly traded corporations or for REITs or those that are regularly traded, that would be a rebuttable presumption that they would trade ownership in whatever years the assessors need to make those changes, but 3 years, 5 years, it's certainly much shorter than that, not asking them to do it every year. Later, and in this discussion we had with Quentin Kopp, I'm going to recognize and respect and urge you for the late Joel Fox, who passed away recently. He said to Quentin Kopp, and we were in the room together, that change is consistent with Prop 13, that a change that said a change of ownership that was cumulative 50% for legal entities is consistent with Prop 13. And we debated all over the state on Prop 13 and various issues. But in that Quentin Kopp bill, he definitely agreed, and, you know, we're sorry to have lost him. He was a very honest person, and we didn't agree a lot, but we got along very well, and he definitely endorsed the notion that this was consistent with Prop 13, that it didn't change Prop 13. It was the way the legislature needed to act. Shortly after that, John Dutra, who was a commercial real estate broker, came to Sacramento and said, this law is really messed up because I know it personally, I've dealt with it many times, let me change it. And of course, he got hammered by all the business interests and backed off. And then later, Martha Scutia proposed the same kind of change. And I would recommend that to deal with the many problems that LEOPS faces and that the assessors face, and that really exist for land and for publicly traded corporations that change ownership consistent with Prop 13 every year. I don't think that when the anticipation of Prop 13 was that Chevron would be still at 1975 values. So this is a reform that the legislature can do. It would be wonderful if the Board of Equalization to say we want to take some of that burden of tracking all this stuff off the assessors and off the BOE and would sponsor such a bill. It will take legislation, and we encourage you to really examine this and look at the detail. There are obviously implementation issues. For LLCs, they'll need to report if there's a 20% change and then a 40% change, and they'll report cumulative changes to the assessors, which would trigger a reassessment. But it's certainly far easier than trying to poke back into the depths of the way property is transferred or not transferred, or shares are not transferred. So, I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. I do appreciate the efforts that LEOPS has been making and the improvements that have been there. I do think the problem lays with the statute and not with the Board of Equalization, although I'm sure there are administrative changes that will coming out of this hearing that you can also do. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Goldberg? Yes, I received Mr. Schaefer's indication that he needs to leave in several minutes. So we'll miss you, but we'll be thinking about you. Thank you. Questions for Mr. Goldberg? Seeing none, thank you so much for being here with us today and being accessible. We really appreciate your efforts as a thought leader for California. And so we're going to ask for public comment on item 13. If there's anyone in chambers who would like to comment on item 13, we have not received written communication, so we'll go out to our AT&T moderator. Moderator, if you could please tell us if there's anyone on the line who's hoping to speak on item 13.
There is no one in queue at this time.
Thank you so much. Well, members, that brings us down to closing remarks on the informational hearing. I appreciate everyone's patience through this. This could have easily been 2 hearings, but I commit to not doing, I'll skip a chance at doing a full-blown hearing on this, but we will get information back from the assessors and from our academic partners and our thought leaders and others who are here today. And I just wanted to thank everyone for participating in this. This concludes our current informational hearing on the legal entity ownership program. And our last item for today is closing remarks. Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, thank you for bringing this to our attention, the hearing. I learned a lot about this. I thought I knew more about it than what was presented today. Obviously, there's a lot that could be done, and we need to continue this conversation and discussion. But in closing remarks, I know our Vice Chair, Ted Gaines, brought it up earlier about the passing of our U.S. Rep. Doug LaMaffa, and I figured we should adjourn in his honor as well. And then I wanted to just also mention, in my district, we had the loss of a Reverend, Dr. William Sachs Epps, the retired senior pastor of the Second Baptist Church of Los Angeles, who was known for his tireless champion for equity. He died of cancer on January 12th at the age of 80 years old. For nearly 38 years, Epps served as a visionary senior pastor of the historic Second Baptist Church of Los Angeles, where his leadership transcended the pulpit to touch every corner of the city. He devoted his career to service through his advocacy for affordable housing, community revitalization, and spiritual empowerment. His tenure as Second Baptist Church, which began in 1987, was marked by an expansive community outreach. At one point, the church operated multiple shelters for unhoused women and served more than 30,000 meals annually. Epps' legacy extended far beyond his service to his church. He served for more than 3 decades as a commissioner of the Affordable Housing Commission of LA, where his leadership advanced innovative housing efforts that saved lives and strengthened communities. Reverend Dr. William Sachs Epps is survived by his wife, Agreta, daughters, Jacqueline, Andrea, and 3 grandchildren. Now I want to also remember Myra Jimenez, who was shot. Actually, she was an elementary school teacher, and she was actually shot by her husband in one of these domestic violence situations that took place in North Hollywood on January 21st in Glendale. He was actually a firefighter that just kind of snapped. But Myra Jimenez was a member of the United Teachers of Los Angeles, a non-denomination-oriented minister who enjoyed presiding over weddings, but her greatest impact was as a teacher at the Wilshire Park Elementary School. And a vigil was held at the school. She was described as a dedicated patient and model educator. Students said they loved Ms. Jimenez's ability to make learning fun and accessible to them, while her colleagues and student parents admired her genuine passion for teaching. Information regarding Myra's Jimenez surviving family members was not immediately available, but I just wanted to mention that. And then also, I'd be remiss if we didn't close in honor of the 3 individuals that we lost. Well, actually, I take it back. The 2 people that we lost in Minnesota, Renee Good, the 37-year-old writer and poet who lived in Minneapolis with her partner, and her 6-year-old child who was fatally shot by ICE agent on January 7th. And Alex Preddy, the 37-year-old intense care nurse for the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, who was fatally shot by the Border Control agents on January 25th. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez. Mr. Emron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you for putting this forward. It's pretty eye-opening, and it gives me a lot to think about. I also want to thank the Board of Equalization staff, specifically Ms. Lauren Keach, our county assessor partners, UCLA Law School, the California Tax Reform Association, and everyone that presented today for their thorough discussions and very informative. Today's hearing enforces that the legal entity ownership program is essential to preserving fairness and integrity in California's property tax system, particularly as ownership structures become more complex and less transparent. At the same time, the data we reviewed makes clear that challenges remain: persistent late filings, continued reliance on post-transaction discovery, and administrative burden placed on BOE and county assessors are not merely technical issues, they are indicators of where the system can be strengthened. especially looking at laws around changing in ownership and what that triggers. As a board, we have a responsibility to ensure that LEOP is not only legally sound, but operationally effective, equitable in its application, and worthy of public trust. Today's discussion provides a strong foundation for continued oversight and future improvements, and I look forward to seeing how Board of Equalization staff incorporates these insights into ongoing modernization and compliance efforts. So I want to thank you, and I just want to do a personal in memoriam. I lost an uncle last week. He was 90 years old. His name is Abdul Azim Barami. He was an incredible pioneer in the Afghan-American community. Received his master's degree at the University of Purdue and was a professor at the University of Cincinnati. He was a grandpa, a father, and even a great-grandpa. But it's been a tough way to start the year. But I'm gonna miss him. He taught me a lot, and may his memory live on forever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Emron, and we'll be thinking of your uncle. Thank you. And I know that Vice Chair Gaines wanted to speak to the loss of Mr. Joel Fox. And so we will defer that to next month to give him the opportunity to do so, because I think he had some special remarks planned, but was not able to be here for the end of the meeting. So we want to recognize that loss and also allow that to happen, the commemoration to occur when the vice chair is here. So I'd like to say that our next board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday, February 25th and 26th, 2026 at 10 a.m. right here at the May Lee Office Complex in Sacramento, California. And we will adjourn our meeting at 4:34 p.m.